Call the meeting to order at 6:02. It's obviously January the 16th, a special meeting. Normally our regular meeting would be next week, but that's after the assembly meeting on the January the 21st. So we thought we'd reschedule it for now, and then we can address things before the meeting next week for the assembly. Let's start with introductions and welcome. So if people can, I'll introduce myself, then Holly, if you call people out, go around the room.
Sounds good.
So I'm Mike Edgington. I'm chair of Imagine Girdwood and also on GBOS.
We'll go to Kirk next.
Kirk Hessel, excuse me, Kirk Hessel, Girdwood resident and business owner.
Chase.
Good evening, Chase Berenson, Girdwood resident and vice chair of Imagine Girdwood.
Okay, we'll go to Brianna next.
Oh, thank you. This is Brianna figuring out my computer here. Thank you.
Go ahead, Carolyn.
Carolyn Brodeen, Girdwood resident.
Okay, we'll go to David next.
It's us.
Might be David and Patty Hamry.
Good evening. Deb, we'll go to you.
Deb Essex, Girdwood resident and president of the Girdwood Nordic Ski Club.
Kaylee. Okay, Kaylee, we'll come back to you. Crystal.
Crystal Hope, Girdwood resident.
Okay. Kaylee or no? Okay, we'll go to Lori. Lori Trick.
Hi, local, been here a long time, resident.
Hi, Lori.
Hi, been a while.
Has been. Okay. I'll go to Daniel next.
Hi, everybody. This is Daniel McKenna Foster from the municipality. I'm just here to be a reference, or if I can provide any information. Elizabeth Appleby might also be joining us, but we'll just be sitting here to answer any questions if needed. Thanks.
Elizabeth is here too. Elizabeth, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Appleby. I am in current planning. I'm mostly here to listen. There we go. Hi.
Hi from your couch.
Yep.
Okay. And you all know me. I'm Holly Spoth Torres. I am your consultant working on this project for you. Okay, back to you, Mike.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. I think I said last time in our meeting in December that might have been the last before we had approval. I'm hoping this is the last meeting before we get approval of the plan. We'll talk about that a little bit in a bit about where we are. So I'll see if anyone wants to move to approve tonight's agenda.
Is Kirk, I'll move to approve.
Thank you, Kirk.
This is
Have a
Chase, I'll
second from
second.
someone. Thank you, Chase. Okay. If I don't hear any objections, we'll do that by consent. Not seeing anyone object, so our agenda is approved. We'll move on to minutes. Last time we didn't have the September 25th meeting minutes easily accessible. They've been online for a while now, so if anyone who was at the meeting would like to move to approve, accept these minutes.
This is Chase, I'll move.
Thank you. Since there isn't anyone else, I don't think who was at the meeting, I will second. So again, unless I see an objection, we'll accept these. Any objections? Not hearing or seeing any objections. We've accepted the meeting minutes for the 25th, and then the same for the meeting of the December the 4th, our last meeting.
This is Kirk, I'll move to approve. I think I was there.
Yes, I believe so.
You are.
Yep. Thank you, Kirk. And do we hear a second?
This is Carolyn. I'll second that.
Thank you very much. Okay. Sorry, I'm just making my notes. Thank you. Again, unless I hear any objection, not seeing or hearing any objection, we'll approve those. The next thing on the list is any public comments that came in through email. We did actually have a public comment. If we just go to the meeting packet, we had a comment from Anne. It was with reference to some spraying and issues around use of pesticides. All we have to do is just sort of accept the comment. We're not doing anything other than just acknowledging that it came in. So if I could just get someone to move that we accept the comment or acknowledge the comment.
I'll move to accept the comment. This is Brianna.
Thank you, Brianna. And a second?
I'll second Kirk.
Thank you, Kirk. And again, if there's no disagreement, I'll take this by assent. Anyone disagrees? Not seeing or hearing anyone. Okay, great. Thank you. I think that's the most of the boilerplate done. Next thing on our agenda is officer reports. As chair, there's a reasonable amount of stuff going on in the background trying to get us finished on this project. But I'm going to be talking about that in the next couple of items, so I don't have anything specific to mention now. Amanda gave me a brief update just to say that our ARPA funds were completely expended before the December deadline, so that was great, and we've paid off all our outstanding invoices. There's still some money in the donations account. There's a little bit more coming in. And I think based on previous discussions, we're probably okay in terms of cost, but we may have to review that in another couple of weeks. But I think everything is on track. Chase, do you have anything you want to add as Vice Chair? I think we may have lost Chase. I'm not seeing him on the list.
Oh, yeah, we absolutely did.
Yeah, I know he was actually remote, so I'm not sure his internet connection was 100%. So, okay, we'll do no reports from that. So one thing before we move on to other business, one thing I should mention is we have in our bylaws, we say that we have to have been a meeting in the last 12 months to vote. And we had a meeting, a lot of people attended, like about 40 odd people attended, January the 10th last year, which technically is outside that 12-month window. I think it's reasonable to include the people who are at that, because I know Laurie, for example, was at the meeting. So it'll sort of expand the number of people available to vote a little bit. So I would ask if anyone who's officially on the list of eligible voters, i.e. those who've been at a meeting in the last 12 months, if somebody wants to move, that we adjust our rules slightly to include the sort of meetings that happened in just over a year. So if you like, all of 2024's meetings. Let me just have formal agreement to that. If that doesn't make sense, I'm happy to answer any questions.
I'll make a motion to allow anybody to participate who's been to an Imagine Girdwood meeting in the last 18 months.
Okay, I don't have that information available. I do back to the beginning of 2024, but I don't for 18 months.
Okay, I'll amend it to the last meeting of January 10th, 2024.
Okay, thank you. We get a second?
I'll second that. This is Carolyn.
Thank you, Carolyn. And again, I'll do that by assent unless anyone has any objections. We'll just go through the formal process. Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone. I don't see objections, so that now includes anyone who attended a meeting in 2024. Okay. So let's go on to item number 6. Do you want to take this, Holly, or do you want me to?
I think I want you to. Is that okay?
Okay. Yeah, sure. So our last meeting was on December the 4th. It was before the public hearing, the first public hearing on December the 17th. At the time, we had seen the ordinance introduced, and it was based on the planning and zoning recommendations. That was the very first. That was the first ordinance, AO 2024-114. Since then, what happened at the December 17th meeting was, first of all, an S version was created. So that's both an S version of the Assembly ordinance and an accompanying updated plan. I'll talk about that in a minute. And then we had the Assembly public hearing itself. And there were about, I think I counted 21 people from the community that spoke at that public hearing. And I'm sure there were also written comments as well, which came in beforehand. And I think it was definitely a good turnout, and there was a fairly consistent message, I think, from the community. So what the S version is basically an update of the plan, which included the comments from, or the recommendations from planning and zoning, which we as a community, so this body, Imagine Girdwood, and LUC and GBOS, were all comfortable with and agreed to. So that the S version of the document is basically the updated plan with technical changes and with other changes that are recommended and were consistent with, I think, the community view. So that's where we have, and that's actually on the website under S version revision. So there's a list at the beginning there of all the changes, and then the documents follow. The other thing that the one new thing it added is a slight update in language. So instead of using the terms for residential low density and mixed density, which was somewhat confusing because they don't really control density, we changed the terms to low intensity and moderate intensity. And there was a little bit more language to explain what that meant and why it wasn't quite the same as density. So that is the version, the S version of the plan, which is again supported by the community. And there's an accompanying ordinance in front of the Assembly. So that's where, and I think there was 20 out of the 21 people who gave public testimony at the December the 17th meeting, I think supported the S version or said comments somewhat similar to that. I think there were several people who testified at the meeting, and there was some great testimony from many different people. I'd like to thank everyone for that. I'm not going to repeat all the things that were said. I don't remember them all, but it is all on recording. I think it was, again, I think it was a good demonstration. This is a well-supported plan from the community. Do you have anything to add to that, Holly?
I don't.
Right. So I think that if we go back to the agenda, I think what we were doing there is just summing up where we got to at the end of December, right? So that's what happened in the formal meeting. The decision was postponed. It wasn't made at December 17th meeting. It was postponed, and the public hearing continues on January the 21st, next Tuesday. What we're expecting and what we've been told by the sponsors is that because the January the 21st meeting has a lot of material on it and many of the things on it have to be passed that evening, because to get onto the municipal ballot in April, they have to be passed by, I think, the 21st or 22nd. Because of that, it is very unlikely that we will get to a sort of robust discussion about the comprehensive plan on the 21st. So what the sponsors are going to do is continue the public hearing again to February the 11th. So we're in this kind of tricky space. If we can't guarantee that will happen, because that has to happen in the meeting, and it's possible something else happens. But the normally what happens is the sponsors get the first say, and they are going to call for a continuation until February the 11th. So what this means in terms of giving testimony is you probably can speak on the 21st because there will be a public hearing. But because the discussion won't happen that night, it probably makes more sense if you want to speak on February the 11th. The other thing I've heard from the Assembly is that when we get to February 11th, there may be amendments being discussed. There may even be another version of the ordinance. If you've already spoken, so if you spoke at the December the 17th meeting, or in fact you speak at the next meeting, you can still speak, but only on the differences which have been introduced since. So you wouldn't necessarily get a, you know, this, you'd be able to, you'd basically only be able to speak in narrow sense. If, however, you have not spoken in public testimony before for this item, then you do have the full 3 minutes and can talk about, you know, the whole issue. So there is this kind of, you know, sort of nuance. So if you want to, you know, definitely, because there are probably going to be 2 opportunities to speak. If you're not available on the 11th, maybe it makes sense to go on the 21st. But if you're available on both, it probably makes more sense to go in February. It's going to be more of a substantial item there, and anything you say will be fresh in the mind of assembly members as they make deliberations and votes. I know I'm doing this in slightly the wrong order, but that's where we understand things are going to be at the moment. I'm jumping back to item 7 because I think this is really the meat of what we're going to discuss tonight. So, as I said, the S version represents sort of all the things that are agreed on, but there are still quite a few things that are not agreed on. We got a memo from planning today, which I think goes into some detail about this. If we go to the end of the document, there we go. So there are, is it fair to say, Elizabeth, of 4.5 items on here, or 5 items? How should we describe it?
5, but the 5th is really just kind of a cleanup.
Right. So therefore, I'm going to speak to this briefly, and then you know, Holly and Elizabeth and Daniel and anyone else can sort of join in to clarify. So the first question, this has been a question for a while about vegetative buffers. I think where we currently stand is people are comfortable with the language. The only question is whether we specify an exact distance in here or not. My thinking is that because all of this is HLB land, and HLB understand the issues, and there will be a sort of robust public process around any replatting of this land, I'm comfortable with not having a number in here. I think the intent is clear. And whether it's actually 100 feet or 70 feet or 60 or 130 is kind of very much depends on the facts on the ground when a particular platting action happens, and where people want to put roads and all these other things. So to me, I'm comfortable with the with what this actually does is just take out, I think, one sentence at the very end that says it'll be an average of 100 feet from the S version, but it keeps the things that are important in there. So that's Holly, did you want to speak to this? And then I'll let Elizabeth speak if I've misrepresented anything.
No, I feel comfortable with this. I mean, it rests on people understanding what's happening on the ground and, you know, land being the transactional planning actions that happen with the land happening before HLB disposes of any land. So, which is how they do things. So I feel comfortable with it. I don't know. I'm interested in what everybody else thinks, though.
So let's just give planning an opportunity to just correct anything we've misrepresented.
Mike, I think you did a good job explaining it. I guess I'll just say, because I'm in current planning, so we tend to get, we get applications for cases including plats. So if this 100 feet is there, we're going to be measuring. So it gives more flexibility, I think, where the vegetated buffers could follow terrain, or Mike, like you said, they could vary in width.
Okay, so let's open this up. If anybody else want to talk about this or have thoughts? Chase, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm curious, if we get rid of the measurement, the 100-foot buffer, and we rely on the intent, which is listed here as areas of existing established vegetation for wildlife corridors. I mean, we can all read it. I'm not going to read it out loud. But do any of these terms have definitions in municipal code elsewhere that would be relied upon, like a wildlife corridor or a noise buffer or natural visual landscape? Are any of those actual terms, or is this just a descriptive sense of what we're looking for?
I'll take a stab, and Elizabeth, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't believe these things are necessarily defined. Like, we didn't go to any definitions anywhere to develop this. This is mostly just describing our intent at this time.
That's correct. There's these aren't defined in Title 21. I did mention that we do have a table for landscaping, and the widest minimum planting bed width in that table is 30 feet.
Yeah, and
Okay.
the intent of that table is like really for the installation of new landscape. And this is intended to preserve existing. So it's kind of different.
Great,
And-
thank you.
The other thing I'd add is the purpose of the comprehensive plan isn't to define rules that are followed later on. It's to give direction to the definition of to the generation of those rules. So this is not zoning code. One of the actions that comes out of the approval of the comprehensive plan is developing zoning code. So we could still, when we do that zoning code, put in conditions and put in specific rules then, which, you know, planning would then follow, and hopefully developers would also follow. But this is to put the intent in place. So it gives guidelines for how that code should be developed. And between now and when that code is developed, it gives guidelines on how major, if there are new subdivisions or something put on HLB land where this would apply, then it gives some directionality as well to how that would be implemented, even if we don't have those rules in place yet.
All right,
I think,
perfect.
again, I'll defer back to planning if I've misstated that. That's my understanding.
No, that's correct. This plan outlines intent and your policies that you want, and then actually amending the zoning code is a different process. And yeah, because otherwise we're going to be looking into this plan for that 100 feet, whereas if there is a specific number, it would probably be better to have it in our code.
All right, perfect. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure, in a hypothetical world, I would have felt silly if, like, noise buffer had been defined as 10 feet of vegetation and we were accidentally putting that into our document. That was more my goal with the question. So thank you for the answers.
Hey, Mitch.
Hi. Sorry I was late, but it looks like you're right at the most interesting part of this discussion. This proposed solution, which Chase was just addressing, I think that's an excellent point, is we need to know whether there are numbers that people who weren't part of this process later on might find that are conflated somehow with what we're trying to do. But you know, after reading this, it just screams out to me, well, how wide are these vegetative buffers? You know, if I didn't know the background on this, that would be the very first question that anybody who wants to try to abide by this is going to want to understand. So to me, it's got to have a number or a range or a nominal value or something. I mean, we don't necessarily have to set a hard minimum or, but there ought to be some kind of order of magnitude number that is sort of illustrative of how wide of the existing vegetation, you know, what that needs to be in terms of wildlife corridor and so forth. So I mean, if it can't be 100 feet, if it can't be hard and fast 100 feet, still that's kind of the scale that we're looking at. We're not looking at 30 feet or 40 feet. I don't think anybody would on this call would agree that that's adequate. So I'd like to see a way to put a number in, even if it's like only referencing other sorts of planning or buffering solutions of what would be meaningful. You know, and I don't know that we have to limit it to 100 feet either. It would really all depend on the exact details of where it was and what the adjoining what plans that were actually being developed were, how that worked out, what scale that was on. But I'd sure like to see a number in there, and I think anybody who's reading this for the first time and then trying to apply it, that's what they're going to try to do, is figure out, well, what is the number that they can put onto their plans that they're developing.
I mean, that's why so that's why we had a number before, using that argument. If it gives a scale, it gives a sense of what they are. And then there was some flexibility by saying average. But I think the counter argument is that that's probably a job for zoning code, not necessarily a job for the comprehensive plan. And ultimately, this does depend on, this is all HLB land. And this does require this, a platting action, a public process around it. So if there's some, I don't know exactly how the right way to phrase this is, but if there's clear intent in the language, I think, and the sense of, two trees deep means it's not 10 feet or 15 feet. 2 mature trees here is probably of the order of 50, 60 minimum, and maybe quite a bit more. So I think there's already a sense of scale in there. But I mean, I agree with your point about that. My preference was to have a distance in there. But I also see the argument for not having a distance in there. I think that's
where does it say 2 trees deep in this proposed language?
I think it does in actually our language, I believe. This may not be exactly what we have in the. Can you go back to the?
Version. Where do you want me to go, Mike?
Well, you can go to the S version or what you had.
So, like here. Oh, if you give me some time, I'll go look and I'll go pull up what's actually in the document. I mean, that is something we can do. We can propose in the S version that I feel like it would be okay to go to talk about the diameter of 2 large growth spruce trees. Like, that was the intent. There might be areas out there where there are no trees. Like, that's what this is trying to get at, right? Anyway, let me see what it actually says in the document. But go ahead. It'll take me a second. Kirk has his hand up.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I would just advocate for a little more specific language, because without saying the buffer to accommodate 2 trees, someone's going to propose leaving 10 feet of bushes, and now what do you do? So I think some specific language is helpful, even if you don't have a specific number in mind. 2 trees sounds good.
Okay, I will do that. I don't think we have that in there now. Let me find the document, page 316, and okay, I'm gonna let you see behind the curtain here, but let's see. So we're also keeping track of edits that happen, so. Yeah, we didn't talk about 2 trees. We can add that. Does that sound good? And that'll be in the descriptive language. Because that'll help with intent.
Right, it seems like instead of the sentence which introduces the average of 100 feet, that's where the the two tree type width would be introduced. And you could say something like in the old growth forest in Girdwood, this on the average would be 100 feet.
Okay, I'll add that to my to-do list.
Yeah, it just ends at the bottom where it says the buffer can vary in width, but that argument about the size being related to the size of the trees, I don't see that in there.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really compelling.
I think there was in one version of the document, but thank you for pointing this out. That was definitely the intent of having that language in there. Kirk.
I think his hand.
Oh,
Did you-
sorry. Is your hand still up from earlier, Kirk?
No, do I take it down myself or do you take?
I got you.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
We can do it both ways.
Okay.
Thanks. So, so Holly, do you have enough information to propose some specific language
I do.
now?
Oh,
Or would it require some nuance? So what I'd like to do, if we can make a decision of what we're comfortable with, I would, it would be good to have that decision and then we can move on.
the buffer can vary in width. However, the intent of the vegetated buffers is to retain areas of existing established vegetation to provide wildlife. Blah, 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 blah. I think we just add another sentence at the end that says, I mean, I think we put it on the Girdwood community envisions. I mean, I think you could say, let's see, when establishing this policy, the Girdwood community envisioned a buffer width of about 2 large spruce trees.
Yeah, I think that's fair because that's an accurate description of all the conversations up to this point.
Yeah, I think we be that. I mean, we just say that's what the community envisioned.
Right. And it's both, it gives a sense of scale without being a very specific measurement that then has to be implemented in everything in the future.
Right. Let's see. Let me.
And would it be true that if you're in a meadow area where there aren't really any trees, then you could have a different sort of spacing?
Yes. I mean, then there's no buffer. Then you're just like dealing with normal setbacks, etc. It's likely wetlands.
Right, but you would still like to have enough width so that you have movement of wildlife and or trails.
I think there'd still be a vegetative buffer. It would just be the vegetation from the meadow. It wouldn't be necessarily trees if you're in an area that isn't treed. So that the language would still apply. It's just in that particular case, you wouldn't have large spruce trees because they don't exist. But this is exactly the point. There has to be some flexibility to deal with the realities of the terrain in any particular place. And if we're too prescriptive, that actually causes too many problems further down the line. We can try and we can definitely get further into this when it comes to either zoning code or when there's a particular platting action, and ask the question of, does this meet the intent? Because again, this is all public land we're talking about. That's the only vegetative buffers don't apply to any private land at the moment. They're all public land, and HLB is I think HLB have said they're quite comfortable with the language we proposed.
And is it correct that these types of buffers are basically between larger developments? This is not like the buffers between individual lots, which
Correct.
Seems
They're
to
all
be
on large
how-
tracts. Yeah, they're all on large tracts. It's the, if we go to the, we're going to ask Holly to move too rapidly between things, but on the land use map, this is basically between, for example, behind the developments along the Alyeska Highway, so where this dotted line is, and then further up. So it's a number of different, it's performing a number of different tasks, but one of those is sort of screening for any larger development with more clearing, basically more forest clearing. It gives a visual break or a visual screening from elevation at the resort end on the resort mountain, and a few other things as well. So it's a limited set of areas, and this is all public land. It's not between two individual privately owned parcels of 1,800 square feet each or anything, or 1,400 or 800 or whatever, 8,000 or whatever.
Right. Okay.
Okay. What I'd like to be able to do, if people are comfortable, is to just, you know, make a decision on this and then move forward to the next one. So when Holly has some proposed language here, and we'll allow some, you know, if there's some grammatical changes that are needed to fit the paragraph, they can of course happen. But if we as a body are, if we as Imagine Girdwood are comfortable with taking out the 100 feet definition and putting in language very similar to this.
Well, I think what Holly has on the screen right now, it's perfect. It just needs to say which on the average is about 100 feet at the end of it.
That's roughly what we had, and that's what we're taking out.
Yeah, I don't think we should include the width. I think if we stay there, it's probably good. Crystal has her hand up. Yeah.
Okay. It would be, I'll just be super honest, it's not my preference to remove the number. I kind of think that this would make it harder for any future plating action, because then you would have to actually go have probably a tree survey done to figure out where all the surveys are before you could, or sorry, where all the trees are before you could draw where the lot line would be or where the vegetative buffer would end. So I actually think this makes it more complicated, but I do think that this is the intent, is to have those mature trees to be able to create the buffer. The other thing that just having the footage in there makes more sense, because when you're talking about like if it's a meadow behind you, for instance, then the same footage would still apply either way. So I do like the intent of the two large trees, but I think it would make it more difficult to figure out for future action on how you would accomplish that. I still prefer to have the number in myself, but that's me. And this, you know, this is the one thing that I've been providing testimony on, both at the Planning and Zoning Commission and at Assembly. This is my big one, because I think that if we do this wrong, we could damage the way that Girdwood looks. And I think that there is enough land owned by HLB to be able to preserve it so that you can't even tell what's going on back beyond those trees. And that's the right way to do it, in my opinion. There's 5,000 acres of municipal owned land. There's 300 acres of private land. 100-foot strip is really not much land. And honestly, I think it's a really fair ask of all the neighbors that'll be surrounded by potential new neighborhoods when it's been like that forever. So I think anyway, that's my 2 cents. I would prefer not to remove the number, because I think this makes it a little bit more difficult.
Thank you, Crystal. Kirk.
Yeah, I think whatever happens has to be pretty specific, because people understand what you mean. And my concern is someone's going to interpret this to mean about 6 feet, because we haven't said 2 trees and the root structure it takes to let those trees grow naturally and so forth and so on. So I don't know the way out, but it's going to have to be something specific. I can see maybe 100 to 60 feet is what we're talking about here. It's going to vary based on circumstances, but you say the width of 2 spruce trees, someone will say, well, that's 6 feet. One's 3 foot, one's 3 foot, 6 feet's my buffer. So it's gonna have to be descriptive or it's not gonna work.
Thank you. Yeah. Chase.
Kirk set me up perfectly. I was going to suggest, instead of just saying the width of 2 trees, explaining the width of the branches of 2 trees or the canopy of 2 trees or something more detailed about the trees. So I'm just following up with Kirk on that. Thank you.
Okay, Carolyn.
Hi, yeah, I'd like to agree with both Crystal and Kirk on that. I definitely feel much more comfortable with a number in there. And everybody has a different idea of what large spruce trees are. I think that's almost a confusing description, and it doesn't even apply where there isn't any trees. So I'd be more comfortable with a number 100 feet or maybe more, 130 feet or something. Thank you.
Mitch?
Well, Chase beat me to it. I was going to add the width of the canopy of 2 large spruce trees, and then put a clause that says which typically ranges or typically averages 100 feet in old growth forest. But I like the idea of tying it to the type of vegetation, because if there are smaller trees, then it doesn't necessarily have to be as wide, or different types of trees, or a meadow. But we should put some kind of number in there. I think we have to.
Thank you. Brianna?
Thank you. Thank you everyone for your comments. I agree with them. And to tag on to the width comment that we're editing a little bit, I like the word canopy and also something like diameter, because that gives the visual a little bit to the stretch of all of the branches to me as a reader. But I also earlier liked the phrase average between when there was the range of feet that went below and above 100 feet, because that made it sound more, I just feel like a specific number like 100 is an easy target for anyone to disagree with without taking each parcel into consideration and all of the nuances in that area, and whether there's creeks or meadows or really cliffy spots. So having a hard number just can't apply to everything, obviously. So having an average seemed like it was easier to digest, I guess. But all of us kind of have a visual of what we think an old growth tree is, and watching them, some of them fall last week when they have nothing around them. It's huge. So I like the feedback, and I think that's all for now.
Thank you. Chase?
Just to throw it out there, and I know this is not representative of Girdwood, but if you Google width of canopy of large spruce tree, the top result is 30 feet. So someone who's not been involved in these discussions, even if they read exactly what we write and try to follow it to what we're saying, that's going to be a 60-foot buffer.
Okay, thank you. I was going to ask our landscape architect if there's a definition of a large spruce tree.
I mean,
That would mean.
That's what Bree and I did a lot of talking about it, and that's why
Yeah.
that's why we landed on 80 feet.
Yeah, right.
Bree and I did. So that's why we actually put a number in, but because we knew it's variable, but also like we also understand how things work on the ground and the processes that HLB is going to use. And so we kind of, I don't know, we're okay adjusting, but also this is your plan, it's not ours. So you get to do what you want. Daniel has his hand up.
Yeah, Daniel.
I want to echo what Mike said, that the plan is not regulation. It's just a guideline for what the regulation should do. And the kinds of things that I'm hearing in the discussion sounds like it would, the kind of thing that would be in a subdivision code. Because when people are doing a project, they don't usually look to the plan. They just look to what the code is. And when the code references the plan, it makes it a lot more confusing because they're looking at different places. And if the code is just copying what's in the plan, then it's sort of like, it's just sort of duplicative. So I will just point out that for specifics, you know, any comprehensive plan is really to say the intent. So a later decision maker, when you're making the code, has enough guidance to say, I want to do this, and this fits within what the plan allows, and it gives you that flexibility. And then the code can be as specific or restrictive as you want. But that's the thing that will really determine. Because all the time, I mean, you could say 100-foot buffer in the plan, but then if the code says 50-foot, then as long as that code is in place, then that's what people will use. It could be subject to legal challenge, of course, that the plan is, or the code isn't implementing the plan. But unfortunately, just on the ground, the regulation is what is really the most important. So I think that's why in general planning, it's just kind of been like, when you go through these processes, you want guidance to figure out how to make things work with the specifics of it. But it's also leaving the flexibility for a future policymaker, decision maker to make the choice. So that's all I'll say. Thanks.
And that's why I hope that current planning understands that by putting 80 to 100 feet in this document isn't like writing code. It's just establishing an intent. And I hope that maybe the compromise we find is like that understanding. So like the community has articulated their intent so that when current planning goes to write the code, they can figure out what's appropriate based on that intent.
Well, Girdwood's going to write the code.
Oh, right.
Current planning is just going to interpret it.
Right.
So
it's, yeah, there'll need to be some technical help, but yes. Okay, so I mean, I think we've kind of argued back to where we started. Really, to me, the question is to pretty much repeat what Daniel said, which is what we're trying to say is what do we expect this to be, and then its direction for later code generation, or if anything happens before that code is in place, it's a way to make sure that any specific, planning action meets this intent. So we could do intent as a distance. We can do intent in terms of the the width of 2 canopies of large spruce. Personally, I prefer I think I'm persuaded by the canopy argument rather than a number. But I can understand both. I think it's to me, honestly, as long as the intent is in there, it doesn't really matter either way. If using 100 is going to cause problems further down the line, then I think that's enough of a reason to go to the canopy choice. But this is probably the easiest of the discussions we're going to have tonight. So I think we can go about this 2 ways. We can either actually, no, I think we should just make a decision. So what I'd like to do is just see if we can get let's actually try and do a vote. Let's see. Let's just assume that if somebody'd move that we change the language to be. So basically, I think the choice in front of us is we try and keep it at 100 feet, or we go to this language here. Is that reasonable, or are there any other alternatives that people see?
Yeah. So if you do nothing, it stays this, right?
Yeah, so we have that average 100 feet.
Right.
And what we're effectively doing is replacing that with about approximately the width of 2 large, the canopies of 2 large spruce trees. So what do we want our units of measurement to be, feet or spruce tree canopies? That's kind of the question.
And Mitch.
Well, I think this is what a couple other people already said was that the other alternative is to have both, to say the diameter of the canopy of 2 large, and we could say just trees, and then say in the case of spruce trees, this would be approximately 80 feet. But I think we should say what the size of the canopy of 2 large spruce trees is, but we're just presenting that as an example of how we determine this width.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is ask let's ask a question of our planning representatives then. So if the concern, I think the concern I heard from planning was 100 feet is kind of a very clear categorical statement and it would cause problems further down the line if that's not appropriate. If we have intent language that says canopy of 2 trees and then approximately 80 feet, just as a way to give some sense of scale, but not being mandatory, does that meet? I mean, it's still intent. It's intent with like a safety net. Would that cause the same problems as the blunter language that's there now, where it says about 100 feet? Or would that be closer? Daniel?
I mean, I just say again, that sounds like regulation already.
Yeah,
so when people are looking at the subdivision code, maybe they've copied what's in the plan into the code, but maybe they haven't. So and I'll defer to Elizabeth because I think she knows a lot more than that. But my thing is just the more specific you get, the more you're just creating regulation in code, and then the plan becomes just a sort of a bigger extension of the code. But Elizabeth, correct me if I'm wrong or weigh in. You probably have a better idea.
Yeah, I guess I would still prefer to have a number in the subdivision code for Girdwood. So let me just read this. Trees approximately 80 feet in diameter. Yeah,
I think
no.
it wouldn't be diameter, it'd be 8 feet in width.
Yeah. Let's see. That's wrong. It would be about 2 large structures about 80 feet and
Width.
I was looking too, and I guess my understanding was these buffers might not be like fully contiguous, because I was looking at the ones in the Alyeska subdivision, and like some of them are like interrupted by roads, and I guess I think that was maybe the intent too, where they might not be contiguous because where like not having the number would give some flexibility for them to, I don't know, be interrupted by like a street or a trail or something.
So again, I think what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing is the number 80 feet here is not meant to be a categorical, here is a rule. It's meant to give a sense of scale. So we don't then end up with the arguments of, it says spruce trees, but, is it a large spruce tree of 3 years old, or is it, it's just, there's this, it's a way to kind of be a bit more specific about what the intent is without actually being sort of declarative about what the rules are. It's just a way of clarifying intent. So that would be the purpose of the 80 feet here. Personally, I was comfortable with the canopy language, but again, I think again we're kind of, this is an important philosophical point. It's an important feature of the plan, and but it's also kind of bouncing around a little bit about how far do we go down to being definitive about language that would eventually appear in code versus how much is this representative of an intent. I'd like to kind of get to a clear an answer that this group is comfortable with one way or the other. But so if anyone wants to push this to a decision, I would be very happy, because we have a couple of other things to discuss and we're nearly an hour in. Mitch.
Yes, well, I think that the way this is written, where it's the word envisioned has replaced in the other policy, the original policy. The original policy was much more declarative and said that shall be established, and sounded much more regulatory, whereas this is talking about what the vision was for this and just trying to define that vision through the actual vegetation that we're dealing with. So I like it the way it is, what's on the screen right now, and I would move that we adopt that.
I'll second Mitch's motion.
Okay, sorry, Chase. You seconded it. Thank you. So in that case, we have basically have an option here to make a decision. I hear any further discussion, or should we just move to a vote? Crystal.
I'm considering adding, well, kind of, I don't know that I want to say spruce because I feel like there's other trees, you know, but then I would suggest maybe removing the comma and adding or approximately 80 feet in width. That way it takes care of if it is a meadow area, that they would have some kind of buffer between them and a street. And then just to comment on, I think it's Miss Appleby's, about the contiguous thing, because I mean, I don't expect it to be all the way down those areas because there are potential access points via streets and in existing right of ways. So there already is areas where it would be broken up if that area was developed. But anyway, it's.
Mitch, are you okay with that friendly amendment of this or taking out the
Sure.
comma?
Sure, that's
okay?
yes,
And,
yes,
and Chase,
yes, I agree with that.
Chase, are you good with that?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Okay. I also like that change. I think it makes it clear that we're not saying it's got to be 80 feet. It's just giving a sense of scale to the intent language. Carolyn.
Hi. Well, I'm just kind of concerned that because we've now suddenly moved from 100 feet to 80 feet. Because that happens to be the diameter of the canopy of 2 large spruce trees. I was just more comfortable with 100 foot. Well, I don't. But
So just to clarify what we're doing here, we're ultimately the decision on what the plan is the Assembly's, not ours. So what we're deciding, or what we're discussing tonight, is what changes. We've listened to the concerns from planning. What changes are we comfortable with in the language that we still, we would still as a body support? So this may not be the final language. This is what we're proposing as a modification. Now, it may be that again it doesn't meet what planning wants, in which case we may hear that in a second. In which case, maybe the right answer is not to make any change, and we just have that fight in the assembly room. It's just that now is an opportunity to try and find something that meets sort of everyone's intents. Elizabeth.
I guess not just from the whole meeting on this, but what if I was just looking at the ones that are in the Alyeska subdivision, and I was measuring them? Maybe the language could more heavily reference those, and then they tend to range from, like, I'm just using a measuring tool, so I don't have exact distances, but it looks like about like 50 or 60 in width up to like 150 or so. I don't know, you could just give like a big range like that and more heavily reference maybe how the Alyeska ones are. I don't know if that helps anything at all.
I would say that the thing with the Alyeska subdivision is they were for a completely different purpose. They're basically drainage channels.
Okay.
They're a way to delineate areas that are mostly streams, except for that one that's very north-south, which I think it was originally intended to be a road that went all the way through. But so most of these are drainage, and it's not really for the same purpose. And again, there wasn't the same concern back when this was platted in the early 70s, I believe. There wasn't necessarily the same issue with wildlife corridors and visual buffers and the view shed from elevation that we have now. So, I mean, I take your point, and I know we've used these as examples just to show that there are examples across Girdwood, but the vegetative buffer is meant to be something very distinct and different, and definitely not just a landscaping issue around plants. Okay, so I think we have a proposal in front of us. Let's just go ahead and unless anybody has any more comments, let's just go ahead and get a sense of this, get a sense of the meeting by voting. So I'm going to do this by we'll just raise hands. So everyone in favor of this suggested language, put your hand up. I have to remember where to do that.
Are you? You're
I can't find it. I can't find how to put my hand up.
Okay.
Oh, react. There we go.
Yeah, it's under reactions. It took me like a minute or two because I don't use Zoom normally. I use Teams. But yeah, it's reactions.
Yes. And not under the arrow for reaction. Okay. Just checking. I think everyone has. Yep. Looks like
5,
everyone's.
6, 7, 8. There's 9 hands up. Well, 8 hands up and 1 thumbs up.
Okay.
That's 9.
That's 9. Okay, let's put hands down, and then anyone who's in a position to vote who disagrees with this.
Carolyn, are you agreeing or disagreeing? Oh, her hand's going down. Okay.
Right, 9-0. Okay, thank you. So that gives a strong sense of the meeting. I think 9-0. I think what we're comfortable with this language. Okay, Crystal.
I just want to say thank you for putting a number in there. And I think like getting that group speak and mind together, I think it's really important and valuable. And also I'm hoping that maybe the 80 feet, even though I really want 100 plus, the 80 feet will show compromise and that we are, and that it won't get struck altogether. So for whatever it's worth, thanks.
Thank you. I'm eager to move through the other issues because some are going to be harder and or maybe easier. Can you go back to the document?
Sorry, I was just saving that so that
Thank
I
you.
can use it. Okay.
I'll try and take notes as well at the same time. So occasionally I'm going to be.
Where am I going, Mike? I'm
sorry, the memo from planning.
Oh yeah. Oh. Okay, hold on. I gotta find it. Just give me 1 second. Okay. There we go.
Right. Let's come back to them because I think that might be actually an easier one to deal with.
Mike, do you want me just to say or are you on 2 or?
Let's go. I was going to jump to 3 because I think the mitten might actually be. It's much more. There's much more strong opinions on that, and I think there's actually going to be an easier answer to that.
Okay.
Item number 3, some discussion here. So, I'm going to explain what I think happened and how we got to this point, and then I'll ask Holly to join in and planning to join in as well. So, originally we had this. Well, today this land is allocated in the comprehensive plan and the zoning code as can only be used basically for a commercial golf course. And I think up to 3 very large lot homes can be built there, up to 3 detached very large lot homes. And that's it. So it's not available for housing. It's not available for any development except for golf course. What we proposed there were various suggestions at different points through the process, but what we ended up with is open space. HLB had a comment that they could see some value in, I can't remember the exact wordings, but the essence of it was there could be some housing component there. And I think planning and zoning ended up suggesting with planning's recommendation that the whole area be categorized as low density residential. Subsequently, HLB clarified that what they actually meant in their comments were that there should be the option of extending Alyeska Basin in the way that if we go actually to the map you had just now, the existing conditions map. Yeah, so if you see at the northern end of that area, there are kind of additional lots which sort of stick out beyond that straight line Alyeska Basin into this area. And they could be kind of cul-de-sacs at the end of the roads that come out into that area, or they could be linking roads between these existing roads. So what HLB were basically asking, and they have no plans to do this, but what HLB were asking is, could there be an area about a lot deep along the edge there that could potentially provide this, small incremental housing in areas where there's already existing infrastructure. So what came out of that discussion is a suggestion that instead of making that whole area low density residential, perhaps what we could, or keeping it all as open space, perhaps what we could do is kind of extend down. Now I'm pointing at the screen, which doesn't help anyone, but we could extend down that section where there's lots to the west of that straight line, basically all the way down there. So again, we're not allocating lots. HLB doesn't have any particular plans. There's nothing in their 5-year plan. But in terms of use, of the use map, it basically shows there could be some additional housing just along that edge. And I think the idea was to have a distance which would allow either a cul-de-sac to be added to the end of the roads that sort of extend out there, or to link the two. And I think we heard numbers between about 300 and 500, 300 and 600 feet. And I believe the memo suggests 500. So that's what the question is in front of us. Is this a reasonable thing that the body would be comfortable with? So if Holly, if you want to add anything, or Daniel or Elizabeth, you want to add anything?
The only thing I would like to add is that, you know, if this is something that feels acceptable, that I don't think that the entire strip, let me pull this up again. I don't think this entire strip from like here all the way down, I think it shouldn't start until about here, because this is a lot of wetlands. This is a lot of, it's a creek. And so I think this area here should be retained as open space, but from maybe about here down is where the land is more suitable. It's uplands. It could be more, it is more appropriate for residential.
And Holly, if you go back to the memo, they're just like little screenshot maps, but
why can I not remember? Oh, here we are.
And then scroll up, actually, sorry. Okay, so yeah, so I was envisioning.
I think you're on mute, Elizabeth, I think.
You muted yourself.
Sorry. I was envisioning that parcel, that GOS piece there would still be open space. So you go down, and then I guess my question is, then you're saying, Holly, like that little northern edge, that area.
Yeah, it makes sense to me to just keep that area.
I'd be amenable to that. I guess we're like I don't know of any like plans from anyone for that area, but like if you look at it, it's like the street clearly like kind of ends there, but it's not like it just dead ends like as it was meant to keep going potentially in the future. And there's already roads there and water and sewer, so
okay, let me just look at one thing.
Oh yeah,
because there's the slope. Bear with us just for 1 second. I guess I'm good with that as long as it does match up with the suitability map. Where's my suitability map? Yeah, we can match it to the suitability. There is some green up there.
okay, yeah, that would be planning's preference.
Okay, yeah, because right there is, but you can see where the creeks are based on the red.
Yes.
Okay. So if the community wants to consider this, then it would match the areas where the suitability map indicates suitable. Daniel?
Yeah, thanks. I just want to kind of point out that when Elizabeth and I were like, that's planning's preference, it's not just because we're like, oh, we think that's cool or that'd be good. It's it's looking at it, trying to balance what the plan says it's aiming for, how to address the needs of housing, how to manage new climate norms, looking at infrastructure and that sort of thing. And this seems like one of those places where, because there are all of those road stub outs, and that might be a way, maybe you connect those roads. And by doing that, you prevent a dead end road, which helps with emergency egress and stuff like that. You're building the road, so then you can build some housing on it. So when we're looking at that, it's coming from a place like that of how do we manage to accommodate some of the housing need, but also take care of some of the stuff that was planned before, make the most of land that's reasonably developable, but also acknowledge that many people said they don't want this whole area to be developed. So that's, and Elizabeth, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's kind of how we came up with that. And it seemed like a good way to balance a lot of those priorities.
Yes,
And that's
I think
where-
that was well said.
And I think one of the objections I had to making this whole area, and the most extensive area, more or less up to the creek, low density housing or low intensity housing, is because we actually don't have the road infrastructure to support that larger development. So I like the idea of a more incremental, smaller scale thing. I think is feasible, at least with the road infrastructure. So we don't then hit the problem of, while there is water and sewer there up to the edge, we don't have suitable road. If there's a much smaller development of, a dozen or so, maybe 24 lots, then that's much more feasible within that scale. It stops being, the road stops being the same kind of limitation. So my sense is, again, this is actually a good proposal. But again, let's open it up to discussion from everybody. Kirk. Oh, you actually live in one of those, don't you, at the top?
I do at the top.
Yeah.
And, it's
do you like it?
Yeah, and I think that it's kind of a change in direction, and I'm not sure I'm comfortable trying to move anything forward at this meeting on this, because there's 20 or 30 people who have property that think their property is up against open space, and could find out tomorrow there's a proposal to build homes behind their current property, which they're don't understand exactly where they would go or how they would look, and it could probably result in a lot of opposition without having something specific. I can see where these roads exist, innovative cul-de-sacs that result in 20 or 30 lots that don't necessarily impede anybody else's lot if it's done right. But at this point in time, I can see a lot of these property owners probably not going to be happy with that decision if one is made tonight, without knowing specifics.
Again, we're not going to know specifics because there's no plans whatsoever for doing this. This is very much do we see this as, is this something which at a sort of higher level could be supported in the next decade or two? HLB doesn't have any plans to do this. Nobody's approached HLB with plans to do this. At the moment, it's all allocated to golf course development. That's what we actually have in our code today. So, this is not anywhere close to a real plan. This is again, a conceptual model of how land could be used. So we're definitely nowhere near at the point where, you'd have to inform the immediate neighbors about a particular plan, because we're nowhere near that level. But I take your point. And ultimately, this decision can be made without us being engaged at all. I mean, without us being part of that. It can be made by the assembly. So the question is, do we, how much do we want to be part of this discussion, I suppose? Does anyone else have any thoughts on this? Crystal.
All right, I'll preface this by saying I don't live in this area, and but I have done a lot of research in South Townsite, and what I was told is that we're not allowed to have more than 33 units in South Townsite without a secondary access. And I believe over 1,000 homes are accessed off a timber line. So I'm thinking, how would planning allow adding more back there without that? And then also I just want to say, like, I think, you know, the Imagine Girdwood plan has been so well publicized over the course of a whole year plus that I feel very uncomfortable making a change this late in the game with 14 people on the call. So I would abstain if this goes to vote.
Thank you. Deb.
Yeah, I just want to ask a quick question. You know, it's been proposed that the road is then off of Alpena because it's a dead end road that has utilities. So is that the only cluster that's being proposed then, or is that a road going south to other little clusters? Or is that one of what I look at, like 4 possible cul-de-sacs along that kind of edging neighborhood?
It would be, well, there would be more than just the one, Deb. It would be opportunities for multiple where there were road accesses further south.
Well, it wouldn't necessarily be cul-de-sacs. It could be linking roads.
Yeah.
But again, this is so far away from any real plan. This is just a
it's about land use, right?
Yeah, it's about high level land use or land use categories. So is this something which would be feasible?
Thank you.
Brianna.
Thank you. My initial thought was the need for another egress/road. If any of this were hypothetical in the next 10 years, they have to go together, I would think, in my limited scope of this understanding. So maybe planning could address that. And thanks for everyone's comment.
Carolyn.
Hi, so if this moved forward as the discussion is going now, are you saying we would be perhaps voting to propose this as a alternative plan for this because of versus all open space or the low intensity housing?
So at the moment, the what we have as in the S version is has this whole area to the west as open space.
Right.
There are likely to be amendments proposed from planning. Originally, the amendment proposed from planning through administration was to take the whole of the area between Alyeska and Glacier Creek and turn it into low density housing. I don't know if that's going to come is going to go forward or not. One of the possibilities is instead of doing that, a proposal, an amendment comes forward, which is to basically do one lot width all the way down there as a proposed change. So we don't, again, these amendments, any assembly member can bring forward the amendments, including the administration. So what we're discussing are there things that we could support within the range of options? And the answer might be no. I mean, that's fine. We just want to have this discussion. So again, if there are things we can see that could work at this level of comprehensive plan, not at the level of a specific development, but at the conceptual level of the comprehensive plan, then it's in our interests, if there's something we think that could work, for us to, state so and support it at this conceptual level.
Yeah. So I I actually think this is an interesting idea and possibly a good one and possibly a compromise for a way to get more housing. But I agree with Kirk. It wouldn't be something I would be comfortable voting for all of a sudden, to present to the Muni without it being a little more advertised or more people to weigh in on it.
Right. So that's about process. I completely understand that. From a process point of view, I agree with you. I don't feel comfortable about saying, yes, this is something we want to change. I think it's more a question of if this was a change which came forward, would it be more acceptable, or would it actually be something which potentially is acceptable to the community? It's a slightly different way of looking at it. Mitch.
Yes, I also do not live in that area, but I know a number of homeowners who do reside along that boundary. And in before I moved to Girdwood, I've lived in lots which backed up on open space or parkland that connected to my lot, and that was really almost a priceless sort of arrangement to have your lot be adjacent to something similar to parkland, because it gives you, from your lot, it gives you access to the whole area. And to put another layer of homes, I mean, I can see how it makes sense from a development point, but for the homeowners that are presently there to have their land go from abutting the open space to having another row of lots behind them, they would all be up in arms, and nearly all of those same people that I know who have participated in discussion were absolutely adamant about keeping that whole area open space, not just for their own benefit, but for everyone's benefit. But it certainly directly affects them. And, you know, we're probably talking about just kind of eyeballing it, 24 sort of lots that could be fit in around there, and they would create 24 new lots that abut the open space at the expense of the 24 or so that currently have access to the open space.
I just want to clarify that. Sorry, please go ahead, Mitch.
I just feel like I can't support making a change of that nature, you know, at this time without, and I can pretty much predict how everybody who lives along that north-south boundary would feel about it.
So I just want to clarify, it's not, most of that area is not open space today. It may not be developed, but it's available for commercial recreation. So although our zoning code says it has to be a golf course, we're proposing in our current S version, we're proposing that becomes open space, which it is not today.
Right.
And in
Right, I understand
probably,
that.
yeah, right. So it's, and again, there is a distinction between what we're doing now, which is conceptual and somewhat theoretical, of saying this land is suitable for, as opposed to saying, therefore, this is a development which will happen. There is a whole set of process which will happen before anything actually gets developed, including HLB has to be involved. I said there are no plans to do this. This is about, do we as a community, the criticism you will hear, and I think there are people on this call even who've made exactly the same direct criticism, is that, yes, people say, you know, we want more housing, but when it comes to, do you want more housing here? It's no, because I live there and I don't want it there. I want it somewhere else. I think there's actually an acronym that's used for that, which is NIMBY. And I don't think that as a community, that's actually where most of us sit. I think some people do, but in general, we see the benefits. We have to get, you know, there will be development in this community, additional development, whether we like it or not, that's a reality. And we need certain types of development in this community, including housing. Do we as a community want to honestly be a bit more grown up than just say, I don't want it right next to me, but it's okay somewhere else, or do we not? And I think that's, you know, as a community, we can signal that. So, yeah, I mean, I don't want development right next to me. I've actually, you know, I have this argument at home. There's a proposal for an AWU structure to be literally outside my house. I don't want it there, but it's the right place for it. And from a community perspective, it's definitely the right thing to do. So you can hold both an opinion that, you know, while you personally wouldn't prefer it, it's the right thing for the community. And I think that's kind of what we're discussing here. Now, I also agree that from a process point of view, this is kind of a late change, and I don't think it's necessarily the right thing to do from a process point of view. But from a conceptual point of view, I can solidly see the arguments. Cook.
Yeah, I think that really what the community is saying is 500 acres of new developable land is plenty and adequate and generous and well thought out and well discussed and debated. And that's enough. And I think that's really what I'm saying too with this particular parcel, as well as parcel north of the airport. And I'm willing to draw the line in the sand and take our mission and our viewpoints to the assembly if that's what we have to do, but I won't vote on this. Thank you.
Thank you. That's fine. So does anyone else want to make any comments on this? Chase, go ahead.
I'm worried about what will happen if I say this, but I'm thinking, Mike, similarly to what your statement was. And I'm also looking practically at what happens if we go to the assembly and say, you know, here's everything that planning and zoning tried to amend, and we're going to say no to everything. I worry the assembly won't take that answer seriously and won't then consider the no to our change to vegetative buffer, our change to the mitten. I think all of that will go through. And as I'm looking at all of the things we're discussing, you know, I respect what Kirk is saying, and I think you're very right. And there's going to be a lot of unhappy people, but, you know, to Mitch's point, they don't live next to parkland. That's not an assumption that was made. And if we're going to have, you know, you can count them on the screen, there's 20 lots that border that. And if there's going to be 20 unhappy property owners, but that allows us to then save the vegetative buffers and save the mitten and do other things, I don't think that's the worst thing out there. I think there's a greater good for the community that could be done by focusing on some of our other areas to save that are more community wide. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments on this? Mitch, go ahead.
I would just remind everyone that it's not that we're shooting down all of the recommendations of planning and zoning. We're talking about 3 out of the 11 that we didn't agree with. So in fact, we've accommodated and happily some of the recommendations from planning and zoning. And these are the ones, the 3 that we're talking about, which really contradict our vision and our overall plan. And the argument that the amount of land that is available that's in the comprehensive plan, proposed plan, is, when you look at the growth and the amount of housing that's needed, the developable land far exceeds what our projected growth is. And so I'm firmly on Kirk's side that we don't need to do development here, and that's our decision that we made as a community. So
thank you.
That's all.
Thank you. Kirk, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to point out that if it gets down to a question of what has to be given to protect the area north of the airport, well, that's a different story. Then let's talk honestly about that. And then we can have some relative discussion on what's most important if we have to give up something. But going down here 1 block at a time and giving up a little bit everywhere, we've just given up everything. And I think it's okay to make a statement that 500 acres is enough. Or if that area north, in my book, the area north of the airport is more sacred to me. Yeah, and I would sacrifice a little bit perhaps of this area if that's part of the discussion, but not knowing what's up for negotiation, what's possible, I think there, to my mind, there's an interest in holding on to our ground, and then later seeing where it goes and fighting those battles as we know what they are. But I guess I haven't changed my mind. I mean, I think I understand the point that we may have to give a little bit to get something, but it has to be a little bit more concrete on what we're giving and what we're getting before I'm ready to make a vote on that. Thanks.
Thank you. Kaylee.
I just wanted to speak up and actually reiterate Chase's points because his, concern / point is kind of where I sit as well. And having been through this sort of process with a bunch of different plans and a bunch of these community meetings and whatnot, and negotiating with the assembly or planning or whatnot, while I would love to have more concrete ideas, I think, we kind of know how this works. And I think it's just a matter of priority to me, honestly. So thank you, Chase. You spoke it much more eloquently than I could do.
Thank you. I put my hand up because I have a comment. I'm actually going to not argue a political case at all here. I mean, yes, I definitely take the point that you can argue that we have to give to get, etc. I think just objectively, what we were discussing earlier on was having this open space or having it all low density development or low intensity, residential. And I just did not see a way in which it made any sense to have this whole area as low intensity residential, because we don't have the road infrastructure to support it, and it would take away other options of use of that land. I actually see this proposal as being actually a fairly, not just a compromise, as a reasonable proposal anyway. If I think if those three had been offered at the beginning, I think this would be quite an easy thing for me to say yes to, because it's a way of introducing the option for sort of small incremental development, unlike a lot of the other areas which would have to require new infrastructure and have to be larger developments. So I think just objectively, this is quite a reasonable proposal, and I wish we'd thought about it and it had been one of the things that we'd sort of addressed at the beginning of the process. However, I also think there's a process question here that we can argue about, and it's probably too late in the overall process for us as a body to take an opinion on this. So I'm comfortable if we just have this discussion, leave it as is. I'm comfortable if we make a vote and say yes or no. I think all of those are acceptable. I'm just saying that it's unfortunate that this wasn't an option we thought about a year ago. But the fact it's come along fairly late from later discussion, I think is just, I think it shows some weaknesses in the process. But that's where we are. So again, I think this is a fine suggestion, and it doesn't result in any housing happening. It's just a way in which housing can, smaller incremental development can happen in the future. But again, I don't see that there's going to be widespread support for a number of different reasons tonight. So I think that's fine as well. Okay, any other comments? So I'm comfortable. If somebody wants to make a motion, they can. If we want to leave it as is and not make a decision, that's also fine. I'll give people a minute or two, and then a few seconds, and then we'll, if there's no motion, we'll move on to the next item. Okay, I'm not hearing anything. So let's move on to, so no decision there. We've explored the issues, and I think it was a great discussion. I really value everyone's opinion. Can we go to item 4? Then we'll go back to 2. So actually, I'm going to let planning speak to this directly. Elizabeth or Daniel, do you want to speak to this original proposal and where you are now?
Yeah, I can speak to it. This is really sort of a fundamental thing. Earlier in the process, there was discussions about density or not density, and now I guess, the plan is moving away from talking about density, and it's just talking about intensity. But I think the point sort of holds either way. So the fundamental piece here is that just in general, you have existing water and sewer infrastructure, you have existing road infrastructure. It makes the most sense in terms of planning practice to put more stuff there. So then when you replace the pipe serving 40 people, now it's a pipe serving 60 people. That in the long term is much more cost effective, makes a lot more sense than replacing a pipe for 40 people and then building a new pipe for 40 people somewhere else. Over time, it just leads to this sort of expansion of an infrastructure and high costs. And also just looking at what the plan says about you want people to be walking around, new climate norms, that also seems to support focusing more of the development in sort of central areas. And Mike pointed out that he considers the center the sort of central commercial area. When I look at it, I'm just thinking of that that central sort of crossroads between the highway and that green belt over getting closer to the resort. So our point on this is just that in terms of meeting the goals or the written goals of this plan, it seems to make more sense to focus more of the intensity in the places where there already is intensity. Because if you're putting it out at the fringes on the periphery, you're going to have more clearance, more runoff, more infrastructure impacts. And that just, it seems to contradict or go against what the plan is saying. And another thing we're thinking about is that if it's really, if the density is not going to be an issue and you're going to accommodate a lot of new housing in the low intensity areas, then you might not even need to designate those higher intensity areas, right? You could just accommodate all of that new intensity in the areas that already exist. So that's something else we're thinking about. So that's where we came from this. Although at the last meeting, it became less about a swap and more just about changing the language to explain that within the low intensity areas, you could actually get a lot more housing. But that also has some questions, so if we're not talking about units, then how do you measure how much housing would be allowed? Could you have 8 units in one house or 10 units or so those are some of our open questions.
Thank you. So I'm gonna speak to this because I think this is really interesting. This is a really interesting problem, and I'm going to follow up what Daniel said at the end. So one of the things I think this plan pushes is the argument that what we as a community care about is sort of what gets built in terms of how it relates to the environment. So how much of a lot gets developed, how much impermeable surface is put on lots. What actually happens inside a structure, I honestly don't think we care very much about, or we don't care that much about whether it's a single family home. We probably care about whether it's occupied or not in terms of overall housing, but whether it's a duplex or a triplex or a fourplex, I'm not sure if there probably is an upper limit. But the type of housing within a structure is probably less important than how the structure relates to the lot itself, in terms of definitely in terms of drainage, in terms of sort of mass of the structure. So because of that, that's why we came up with the form-based. That's one of the justifications for the form-based code proposal for residential, and it does allow, it allows effectively things that are currently single-family homes to be turned into 3 or 4 units. It doesn't restrict. It wouldn't restrict redevelopment in Alyeska Basin to be only single-family homes or duplexes, or and even that only duplexes in larger lots. Now, practically, I think there's a practical argument here of most of that yellow area, most of Alyeska Basin is already already well developed. There aren't that many empty lots there. So whatever we do practically isn't going to make that much difference. So I think we can achieve, my feeling is we can achieve our goals. We can be clearer probably in some of the language, but when we discuss what form-based code means, about it doesn't preclude more housing going, quite significantly more housing going into an existing area, but it doesn't. It definitely doesn't. It doesn't require it, but it definitely doesn't limit it in the way I think more traditional views of a density-based model does. So I actually agree with the argument Daniel's making in the sense of there is more benefit in developing in areas where there's already infrastructure. The problem we have is those areas are already developed, so there's a smaller incremental gain you can get there than in areas which don't have infrastructure, or in areas that are not developed rather, which have infrastructure nearby. So that's the area where we can kind of at no cost or limited, really very limited cost in terms of existing. I'm not explaining this well. If there's an area to put infrastructure in, then that's an area where it would be easy to have significantly higher housing units than exist now. But we wouldn't want to preclude additional housing going in areas that currently exist. So I kind of agree with Daniel's point, but I think we achieve that anyway, mostly. And but I'm not the expert, and Daniel is, so I'm going to hear a response. Go ahead, Daniel.
Well, I just want to note that just because things are already built, I mean, we're looking at goal H1, which is maximize the use of existing housing inventory to meet the housing needs in Girdwood. And H1.2, or no, where is it? It's somewhere else in there that says, oh, H1.4, encourage property renovations that increase density through regulatory changes, tax fund. So we're just looking at what the plan itself says. And so I think when we're looking, most infill is actually not so much on vacant lots, I think I can't make a generalized statement about that, but we're just looking at what the policies of the plan say. And the plan says we want to encourage more people to change the existing housing to allow more. And so we're just basing it off that. So even if it's not as much about vacant lots as much as large houses converting from 1 unit to 2 units, or 1 units to 4 units, or 2 units to 6 units, or something like that. So, and that can happen without in an existing structure, or the sort of incremental development where you add an ADU, or you add an addition, or you repartition. So that's kind of where we're getting that. It's from the plan language itself, and maximizing the existing housing inventory, assuming that many, some new builds will happen, but it looks like the plan is saying that the community also wants people to make the most of their existing housing. And so that's why it also makes more sense, apparently, we would say, to encourage that flexibility there where most of the housing already is.
Yeah, and I think that's where I'm partially disagreeing with you, because I think that can all be done within the low intensity. The difference between low intensity, again, we don't have code, but the intention of the difference between low intensity and moderate intensity is, with low intensity, it's roughly the kind of footprints that we have now. In fact, a bit bigger than many of the footprints we have now in that area, which can exactly do what you said. You can add ADUs, you can take large single family homes and convert them into multiple units. That all would work under low intensity. What high intensity would do is just basically have far more structure within existing lots. So there would be more coverage, there would be more impermeable surface. And that's the sort of thing where you actually would need different infrastructure. You'd need better drainage systems than we currently have in Alyeska Basin, for example. So I think we're agreeing, but the argument is, instead of changing, this happens by the change to form-based code, not necessarily by a change in use categorization. But that does also mean that there should be better language in there when we talk about low intensity to explain what it actually means. That doesn't mean low density. It can mean far more housing units, but within kind of existing footprints, roughly. So I don't think we're disagreeing. I think it's just a different way of achieving the same thing. Anyway, Dominic, Elizabeth, please go ahead.
I was just going to say, I don't know that I expected any sort of change or agreement. It was more of just making the points. And I guess if you scroll down a little bit, I did highlight in yellow a phrase that maybe you could consider putting in the S1 version that just says, within low intensity residential, that infill, I mean, it would mostly be infill, I guess, but that infill and new development is encouraged in areas where you already have roads and utilities. I didn't want it to be a surprise, like if we still point this out when the S1 version goes to the assembly. I don't know what will happen to it, but that, I guess the yellow is the only thing I was expecting that maybe would be a change that could potentially come out of this meeting tonight.
Thank you. I think this is a much better expression of what I was trying to express. Are there any other thoughts on this item from anybody? Holly, are you back?
I am.
Okay. Do you have any thoughts on this, on adding this language? Does this fit within do you think the intent of the community and how the plan is currently structured?
land use description, that infill and new development. Okay, we can go there. Do you want to go to the land use category description and look at it? I mean, I think it makes sense. I mean, to develop first where you already have utilities. That's what it's saying, right? I guess I don't see a problem with it. Add language to low intensity residential land use description. Do we have any low intensity that is identified where there's no?
No, I don't think so. I think the low intensity is mostly areas that are already developed.
Right.
Mostly developed.
So it kind of doesn't make sense.
Well, I think that what new development means here is redevelopment.
Yeah, I guess it came out of too because there was an amendment planning had proposed at PZC that they didn't support, where I was proposing a moderate intensity where there's like the grid layout, like basically east of where the like green space buffer tracks are. And so I guess if my thought was, well, if we don't get that land use designation change, maybe we could just put language within that within the low intensity definition that says that it's good to develop. Yeah, that was kind of my thought.
I see.
Because we do have it in the Anchorage 2040 land use plan where it'll say like, here's the land use designation. I guess in that case we have implementing zoning districts, but it'll sometimes say like, I don't know, this residential zoning district, but in some areas within this land use designation, we would support a zoning district of residential office, just as like an example.
Yeah. I mean, so it basically like it achieves the same thing you're talking about, Mike, I think. It just.
I think so, yeah. Yeah, I think it's the same. I think it's the same thing. Just rather than change the categories, I think we could be clearer that what we're actually proposing in terms of implementation code can achieve the same thing anyway, right, for redevelopment. And that's partly that's partly what the other memo showed or tried to show. This has become kind of a very technical argument. I'm not seeing a lot of engagement in it. So I don't know that we need to perform any action. It's just, I think it's been helpful to have this discussion. Unless somebody wants to propose a particular, actually, I'll put it the other way. Does anyone have any concerns with that language that's highlighted there of basically pointing out the low intensity residential? We want to encourage redevelopment within that, and any infill. So what we're basically saying is, we would prefer that there was, additional housing in the areas which already have housing, rather than develop completely new things in, virgin forest. So it's the argument that if we can get to our goals of having new housing by having better use of existing housing, maybe redevelopment of single family homes into multi-unit home housing where housing already exists, that might be better than doing something like Halton Hills, of taking a completely empty area and saying, put something new over there. I mean, to me, this is one of the arguments that sort of goes through the plan of make better use of existing resources. So to me, this is another way of stating that same general goal. Okay, so I think we should just move on. I think this has been a useful conversation, but let's move on to, we could touch 5 and then go back to 2. 2 is going to be I think the easiest one to discuss. Elizabeth, do you want to just talk about this?
Yeah. So this would just be, I guess I would view it as sort of a cleanup. So it's just highlighting a parcel that is split, has a split land use designation. And so we're, let's see, what is it? The orange is mixed use. The pink is commercial recreation. So we're proposing just making the whole parcel mixed use so that there's not two different zoning designations running down the middle.
Yeah, and I don't, like, it doesn't matter either way, really. What mixed use does is mixed use allows more opportunities for commercial development. And this is at the base of the resort, right?
Yeah.
And this is Alyeska property.
Yes.
And the pink would allow commercial use. It just needs to be more related to outdoor recreation type commercial businesses. Either way, housing is allowed in both. It would just be the type of business.
And I guess the plan we're asking that Imagine Gerd would consider it being all mixed use.
Thank you. Again, does anyone have any comments or thoughts on this? Kirk.
Yeah, just a point of information. I don't think it followed. Who owns this land right now?
Alyeska.
Alyeska does.
Mm-hmm.
So have they put a request for what they'd like to see?
Yes, someone from Alyeska did reach out, and they asked me about this split zone, and they asked me different questions on the different zoning designations. So I basically told them what Holly said, and they asked for it to be mixed use.
Yeah, and the reason we did it the way we did it is because the pink area is more like, I think, like active skiing and lifts and things like that are already there. And the orange is like more of the base, but we don't actually, it can go either way.
Yeah, and otherwise it could just stay as it is now too.
Yeah, and I would say if that gives them more flexibility and doesn't affect the community one way or the other, then that's a give. But I like to hear other perspectives, of course.
Thank you, Kurt. David.
That might be two different owners. Because I know Peter Gernwald owns a piece of property in that area.
Oh yeah.
That's definitely something we can find out. I'm not sure if we can do it quite live in this meeting, but we can do that. Crystal, I'll. Do you want to you speak now? I'll see if I can quickly check.
I just think that the dual zoning, I've heard about it being a problem for anybody that's like interested in doing things on the land. So I think it does make sense. And also, you know, to me, commercial recreation versus mixed use would also allow recreation. So I don't see a problem personally with this one and probably would support it.
I'm trying to figure out where this is.
And I just clicked it, and it is all owned by Alyeska.
Yeah. Yeah, just confirmed. Same thing. So this is the area immediately to the east of the Arlberg extension, and I think includes the road that goes up to the I forgot what they call it, the sort of shed where the snowmaking equipment is, and the snowcats live. So that's all land owned by Alyeska Development Limited. And then the area immediately, yeah, actually, yeah, that's it. So again, I think I'm of the same opinion. It's much miss. Laurie.
Yes, it's my understanding that area that's circled or designated with the red, that's the Alyeska property, but over on the left, the other pink section, as far as I know, that people mentioned earlier, that's owned by Peter Grunberg or whatever. And that whole section there is his. Just thought I'd throw that out there. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I just checking. So the area to the west, yes, the area to the
Yeah.
So that the green line is basically the land around the Alyeska, the Alberg extension. Sorry, the
It's the trail.
yes,
It
the Winter
goes
Creek
from the
extension
end
trail.
of-
Sorry,
It
Yep.
intersects from Verbier and it
Yep.
goes all the way over to the base. And then
yes,
I always designate that area in years past as the sledding hill for my kids. So it came down where that straight line is on the south side. That's where that hill goes straight up. And
Yep.
it's kind of the old sledding hill. That's what I
yes.
call it.
So you're correct. So the
Okay.
the brown area to the east of the Winter Creek extension is owned by PJG, I think, and the area inside that red boundary is owned by Alyeska.
Well, okay. Can you see where Verbier goes and then it's
Yes.
okay. That kind of kidney shaped thing, that's Peter's property, as far as I know.
Okay.
Yes, I just pulled up the property map and I was
Yeah.
I was when you said PJG, I was like, okay,
I think
can
what
find
is it, 14, 18
This one.
acres or something? 14, 18
It's all
acres.
these right here.
Yeah.
Yeah, so PJG would remain
Yeah.
in that pink
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
the left. Yeah,
Yeah.
there you
Yes.
go, Holly. That's exactly
And it's
what I'm
and, it,
looking
and
at.
That's
if
right. It's
you,
the area to the east.
yeah, if you
That's to the
walk
west.
that,
Sorry.
yeah, if you walk that, it's got the high bank with the rock and it's all forested in there and pretty big, huge kind of cliffy rocks and
But specifically, what we're talking about is the area to the area to the east of that, which
Yeah.
is all owned by Alyeska.
Okay.
So would I be right in assuming that as a body we're comfortable with it either staying the same or changing to a single use? I don't think there's any strong opinion that it should remain split, the area within the red. Is that a fair assumption? I'll do this semi-formally. Would anyone like to move that we are comfortable with that the area within the red being designated a single under a single land use category? Kirk.
Yeah, if Alyeska in fact owns that and Alyeska in fact
Yes.
requested that, then I will so move.
Thank you. Well, for the sake of formality, we'll get a second if anyone wants to second that.
I'll second. This is Brianna.
Thank you, Brianna. Any discussion on this? So I will see if there's, I will try and do this by consent. If anyone objects, say so, and then we'll do a vote. If nobody objects, we'll just say this passes. Okay, I'm not seeing any objections. So we as a body are comfortable with that becoming mixed use. Thank you. Let's jump to number 2, which is the last one, which is the mitten. This is both a big discussion piece and also, I think, an easy decision. So I'll start and summarize. I think in general, we've heard a lot of opposition from the community about keeping this, or rather, maintaining the same land use zone as it had in the 95 plan. And there's a variety of reasons behind that. So when we've discussed this, I think to me it's fairly clear where the community opinion is, and the S version says that this should become open space. I also understand why Alyeska made this, why Pomeroy made this part of their plan, because this is a piece of land that they're effectively, was sitting there allocated to resort use from 30 years ago, and was an obvious choice for them to use. So one possibility here is that if there is any transfer, while I think it's fair to say that the position of Imagine Girdwood is unlikely to change, and it should remain open space. If there was any land action in the future, and it did get transferred to a private party, then we could put something in the plan to say that there should be commitment to basically following through in the housing goals and the open space goals and the trail goals and things like that. At the same time, that kind of sends a mixed message. So I'd like people just to discuss this. I
And
think
before
sorry,
you
please go ahead,
I'll
Elizabeth.
just jump in and say why I put this in here. So I got this one was when I wasn't expecting like this to change from open space in the S1 version, but I highlighted in yellow what I thought maybe it was based out of the meeting where I heard like maybe it would help put it concretely, like they would have to follow their plans, but I guess this spells it out more within the Girdwood comprehensive plan as well. So that's all. I just threw that out there as a suggestion, but I didn't want to spend a ton of time at this meeting like debating the mitten.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, a lot of what happens if it does go ahead, and if their plan does go ahead, then a lot of these sort of requirements would be part of the process of land transfer. So I think there's two different arguments: should they, and if they do, how. So I'm interested in some general comments. I think it's pretty clear which way this is going to go if we have a vote on it, which is fine. But has anyone got any comments on this? Basically, is anyone interested in? Does anyone think there is we should propose something other than keeping this as open space, which is currently what the S version does? David, go ahead.
I wanted to just do a brief run through. I was on the housing committee when Holton Hills came up, and I asked repeatedly about the status of the other Holton Hill, the other partners of Connie Yoshimura, and the Muni was really vague about any ongoing rights with Pomeroy. And here we are facing this whole thing again because Pomeroy wants that land. And there may be some other ways of satisfying it, but this is their land acquisition needs to make their project work. But this is not the place or the time to do that with this particular piece of land. And the reason is because there's so much uncertainty. There hasn't been, here we are talking, John Faulkner is looking at doing a hotel. Holton Hills is going in, the Alyeska Village is going in, plus a lot of other stuff. And we haven't really done, as a community, a good job of analyzing all the cumulative impacts of all that development on the land, on the water, sewer, power, road system, electrical infrastructure. And we don't know who's going to pay for that. So there is so much uncertainty that I think it's premature to give them a green light on this. And I would hold that back myself a little bit more and wait for those other analysis. So that's what I'm for.
Thank you, David. Okay. Any other general comments on this?
Yeah, I want to say something.
Sorry, is it Patty?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't know his mic was
Right.
still on, because we
Okay.
are sharing this. And so I think it's really, if the Nordics have proposed a trail on the same piece of property, I think that needs to be said at the assembly with the land use, the comprehensive plan, and that the community, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that the community would favor having a trail there rather than mixed use development. And so from my perspective, as a long-term user of that land that we all share, I think it's really important for Girdwood to honor the trails and the meadows that lead up to the north end of the valley. I think that's very sacred land, and that we need to really, I want to say, fight for it in multiple ways. And so I don't want to make anybody angry, or any, any individuals or any companies that are wanting to invest in Girdwood, just to advocate for the beauty of the land and the idea of recreating together now in a multi-use way for the next 100 or 200 years. I think we really need to look forward, and that this land use designation in this moment of time is really an important thing to sort out, and to advocate positively with the assembly what we do want. Thank you, Mike, for the
Thank you.
discussion, and for, we haven't really been part of this process with the comp plan, but we are really paying attention to it, and we respect all of the people that are equally participating. Thank you.
Thank you, Patty. So, yeah, I just want to make a couple of statements and see if we want to perform any action. So what we have now in the S version is that this area is designated as open space. I think it's extremely likely that there will be an amendment brought forward to the Assembly to change it. My sense is, if there is an amendment, there's probably 7 votes to support that amendment. That doesn't mean it's the right thing. That just means I think that's the reality of the situation. However, if it stays open space in the comprehensive plan, that doesn't actually prevent this development going forwards. There's just an extra step that, or the development for Pomeroy going forwards, there's just an extra step they would have to go through, which is, as well as doing the, when they do their development master plan, they would have to also, I believe, change the comprehensive plan. And that's something that can be done in the future. So if this comes out, if the decision is that this land stays open space, that doesn't stop the development, it just adds an extra step. If the Assembly changes it to make it to make this area mixed use rather than open space, it doesn't guarantee that their development goes forward. It just removes one additional step they have to do, and probably indicates that at least the Assembly, the current Assembly, is pretty supportive of that development. Although when they actually come forward and do it, it would be, and potentially when they actually change, when the land gets disposed, it will be a different people on the Assembly. So I know this feels like a truly existential argument, and to some extent it is, but also to some extent it isn't. That whatever the outcome is here, it doesn't determine the future. I think this is a statement of what the community wants, and that's why I'm comfortable with our current proposal of it being open space. But there are still many steps between now and when the bulldozers would come in, if that area was developed. Kirk.
Yeah, I think by maintaining and advocating what the community said all along, at this next step, that gives us an opportunity at every step along the way where this parcel is proposed to be developed, we can say that. This is what the community planned. This is what the community spent 5, 6, 7 years, whatever it's been, coming to a conclusion on. This was our conclusion. And the municipality assembly members changed it. Now we're going to the next chance of discussion, and we're still going to say, this is what the community wanted. And we fight it every chance we get, and we might get our way. Now, the odds are a little bit against us if the assembly votes against us, but at least we can say all the way along, this is what the community wanted. This is what the community was willing to do. A lot of other things, such as 500 acres of developable land and so forth and so on. But this is what we wanted, and we say that all the way through, no matter what happens going forward. That would be what I would advocate.
Thank you. Carolyn?
Hi, yeah, I mean, I appreciate the try at some language that might feel like a little more of a compromise, but saying they have to follow the Girdwood Trails plan. I mean, that's what that guy from Pomeroy says every time he stands up. Oh, don't worry, it'll still have the forest loop. It'll have this and that. But that's, we know that's not what we want out there. We don't want a bunch of development with a couple trails running through it. We want it to be open space. And I agree, we need to just stick with that. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask, does anyone want to move that we change the position so our current position again is that area stays, that area is allocated as open space. Does anyone want to move that we change that? I'm not seeing anyone move that, so that's where we stand then. So we're going to, we've discussed it, but we're going to stay in the position at that the mitten, the forest loop area, remains as open space. Let's see. I think that's gone through the 5 topics. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Elizabeth? Thank you for joining us, and thank you for explaining the reasoning behind these.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and Mike did a good job facilitating. I don't have anything else to add.
Okay, thank you very much. I can't remember if we had anything else we needed to discuss. I don't think so. If you could just go back to the agenda, Holly. Yeah, I think we've covered, oh yeah, there was one other thing, sorry. There is one other thing I wanted to mention. So what we've discussed so far is some of the amendments that may come forward from the administration, from planning through the administration to the mayor's office. Individual assembly members can also propose amendments. I know at least one. I've only heard of one specific thing which I know is going to happen, which will be an amendment to change the area north of the airport from open space to mixed use. I know that somebody's going to bring that forward anyway, even if the administration doesn't. There may be others, I don't know. But again, if there is always a chance that things can happen on the floor, even at the meeting. So it's always a little bit of an interesting situation. Generally,
I'll
if
just
there
add,
is,
I don't
sorry.
know either.
Yeah.
Yeah, of any other amendments that assembly members might be considering.
Yeah. So, and again, if even if we had something where everyone agreed with the administration and us and everything else agreed, and there was a clear thing in front of the assembly, I think it would be easier for them to just say yes to the whole thing and not start going down the amendment process. I don't think that's where we're going to be. So there's definitely a potential adventure ahead of us here. But again, I just wanted to mention that we don't know what's going to happen, and it's really down to individual assembly members. I'd encourage everyone to, continue advocacy and talk to anyone on the assembly, and continue passing the message across. Ultimately, the purpose of the comprehensive plan is meant to express the vision and values and goals of the community. I think that is what we've done. I'm proud of what we've done to this point. It's just the nature of the situation we're in, the political position we're in. Of we don't make the ultimate decision. That decision is made by 12 people who live elsewhere and primarily represent Anchorage, Bowl, and Eagle River, and not Girdwood. So we're ultimately we're not steering this particular ship. Again, from a practical point of view, there is a hearing. There will be an opportunity of public hearing next Tuesday. It is likely that there will be continuation to February the 11th, and that's when the decision will be made. Kirk.
Yeah, thank you. I just had a question about the hearing coming up.
Yep.
It sounds like it's not for sure that it will continue to February 11th. Is that
correct? There would have
really,
to be
you really do need to be there just in case, because
I will be there just in
no
case.
insurance going to be able to say something on February 11th. Correct?
Well, there's what will happen is this. What typically happen is when this item comes up, the sponsors of the item will get to speak first. The sponsors of the item said they will move for a continuation. So it is possible. So they will move for a continuation. It's possible that 7 members of the assembly will say, no, we want to deal with it tonight. However, I think that's almost a 0% chance of that happening because there's other things that have to be dealt with that night. I don't think they're going to want to try and deal with this additional thing that night. I think there's almost no chance of them saying no. However, there is a chance they could still close the public hearing and then just deliberate on the 11th. The problem is we don't know. You can't get 7 people to publicly state, what they're going to do on this. It's just too hard. So, if I was a betting man, I think there is almost a certainty that this will continue until the 11th. But there is a small chance it won't. So I will be there. Because if it does move to deliberation, I think it's important there are people there. Again, if you want to speak and you've spoken before, you can only speak on changes. So if nobody has moved amendments or nobody has published amendments, then there's nothing to actually speak on. But if you haven't spoken at all, then there's absolutely an opportunity to speak on the plan.
Thanks for that clarification. Appreciate it.
I'm not sure it clarified anything, but that's the best I know. Okay, Mitch, then Dave. Mitch, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Says that the host stopped my video, but I'm here. So if there's an S1 version introduced, does that affect what we can testify on, or who
Yes,
can testify?
if there is another version introduced or any amendments introduced, then you can. If you've testified before, you should be able to speak to the
And
differences.
this is on what day?
There is a meeting. There is a public hearing scheduled for January the 21st, next Tuesday, and then it is very likely that it will be continued on to Tuesday, February the 11th. It's extremely likely that it will be. However, there is no guarantee in this particular space.
And when would we know if there is an F1 version coming forward?
The S1 version would have to be introduced at the next meeting, which is on January the 21st.
Okay, so we won't know ahead of time.
No, and then it can be laid on the table. And then if there are any amendments, they can also be either laid on the table or in fact just introduced while debate is happening. Amendments can be introduced after the public hearing is closed. So that's an issue with the process.
Okay.
Okay. Was there anything else, Dave or Patty? Anything else you wanted to say?
Yeah, I think you answered my question, but the S version has not been introduced, so we're still back to the original version with
No, the S
Planning and
version.
Zoning Commission.
No, that's not correct. The S version was introduced on December the 17th.
Okay.
The S version was introduced and it's in place. That's basically what everyone is working from.
All right, sounds good. Thanks.
Thanks. If there isn't anything else, we'll just we'll jump to public comments, and then we do not have. I'm not seeing any public comments, so we'll just do the last thing about next meeting. We would normally have a meeting on the 26th of February. I think what we're actually going to do is play this by ear. We'll see how it goes. I think if we need a meeting, we'll call a meeting. As I said, at the moment, the important dates are public hearing 21st. There will be an opportunity to speak if you haven't spoken before. My recommendation is probably keep powder dry until February the 11th. We expected to move on to February 11th. That's when I think the final public hearing and the deliberation decision will be made. There is also this is going to come up at the GBOS meeting as well. We have on the 27th, if people have any other comments or thoughts. GBOS has already, and LUC have passed a resolution supporting the S version. If there's change if there is something else introduced next Monday, then next Tuesday, sorry, then GBOS may take a position on that. I don't know. I'm not sitting on GBOS for that particular purpose. Okay. If there are any other questions, raise your hand. If not, then I would call for an adjournment.